Welcome to today's conversation on Sportsmanship as Citizenship, a coast-to-coast program hosted by national nonprofits RISE and the Rose Bowl Institute. I'm Sam Farmer of the Los Angeles Times. Today's conversation features a bicoastal panel, one here at the iconic Rose Bowl Stadium in Pasadena, California, and the other from the ESPN Seaport District Studios in New York City. This diverse group of sports leaders will share how they as athletes, teams, and leagues can help drive civic engagement and empower and inspire others to impact their communities around matters of social justice, racial equity, diversity and inclusion, while using sportsmanship values. I want to discuss these and other relevant topics of the day. So let's get started and introduce our panelists. In New York, we have Diane Billings-Burford. She's CEO of RISE, co-host of today's conversation. RISE is a national nonprofit that educates and empowers the sports community to eliminate racial discrimination, champion social justice, and improve race relations in our country. Troy Vincent is a former NFL player and the executive vice president of football operations for the NFL. He also serves on RISE board of directors. Morgan Tuck is a former WNBA player, now director of franchise development for the Connecticut Sun, helping to lead the team's social justice initiatives. And here at the Rose Bowl, Charlie Firestone, president of the Rose Bowl Institute, and our other co-host for today's conversation. Kobe Jones is a former U.S. national team player and member of the Los Angeles Galaxy of MLS. He's also a TV analyst and co-owner of the expansion NWSL club Angel City FC. Dr. Jen Welcher is a pioneer for women in football, the first woman to coach in the NFL, and she opened the door in 2015 for now 12 full-time NFL assistants, including 2 with the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll start this off. This is to Charlie and Diane. The theme for this conversation is sportsmanship as citizenship. Charlie, can you please explain that to me?
Yeah. So as you said, the Rose Bowl Institute champions sportsmanship, leadership, and citizenship. And we actually find a connection between sportsmanship and citizenship. There are actually parallels, such as appreciation of the game is the need to understand the democratic process. Fair play is equal justice under law. Respectful competition is respect for the other, which unfortunately we're not doing enough in the political sphere. And, there are other parallels, personal integrity and teamwork, which leads to collaboration among opposing sides or various individuals. And right now in this polarized society, we think that sportsmanship is a great way to lead into civic literacy. And we're hoping to be sending athletes into schools throughout the country. We're starting with 2 pilot programs where they will talk about sportsmanship and the mentality of sportsmanship, which we're hoping will, in the long run, win out over the win at all costs mentality. And that mentality and encourage sportsmanship, but particularly also encourage individual citizenship through those parallels. And the kids, let's face it, right now in our scarcity is our time and attention. And if we have an attention economy, right now it's fear, anger, hate, and sensationalism that's getting attention, and sports. And sports has a great opportunity right now to add to our civic engagement.
Diane?
Yeah, at RISE, I think, for us, citizenship and sportsmanship, they really are two versions of the same concept, right? They are both laying out how folks are supposed to act, how you're supposed to treat one another, whether there are rules that are written or unwritten, where there's this social agreement about how things are supposed to go. So we think they're both the same thing, and they're just applied in different arenas. They tell you what you must do, and they tell you what you should do. You know, in sports, it tells you got to play the game that's in front of you. You got to play your position. It tells you what you should do, how you should treat your teammate. It even tells you how you should treat your opponent. And so we think because, you know, we have those same concepts and the same understanding of social agreements and social constructs, it's one of the reasons RISE seeks to address citizenship through sportsmanship. We think in this population, we have a population that has to understand this concept to be the best at what they do. If they can't do that, they can't be great sportsmen and sportswomen. And so we think that's a good reason to start these conversations about citizenship and about equity in this space.
Troy, you're at the highest level of the #1 sports league in the country. Consistently, the top rated TV shows are NFL games. How do you balance what you believe is the morally correct position to take on social justice and racism with the very real bottom line business decisions that leagues, teams, and individuals need to make?
Well, it starts with just civil conversation. And just my experience at the National Football League. We're not the moral compass for our society. We can be an example. It really begins with men and women coming in the room, agreeing on items that they both care about in a civil manner that allows us to function properly. Just my experience seeing what works and what doesn't work is when one group, the athletes, have a point of view around the subject matter, and the construct of our organization or the league or management has a different view. It leads to just bad outcomes. But when you can kind of break down and really talk through what are we trying to accomplish? And oftentimes it's just very simple. The athletes are the voice, doesn't matter the sport, and in particular ours, they become the voice of the voiceless. These are men and women in football, the men that are representing their communities, they see or have experienced poverty that they want to address. They see inequities in housing and education that they want to address. We've saw this reckoning around police brutality, which has gone on for decades. And to have that conversation around, you start talking about what's morally right, the 9 minutes and 26 seconds that we all experienced and saw, it caused us to pause and say, who believes this is right? And then how do we fix it? So as a sport organization, just back to your original question, Sam, it's how do we address these issues that have plagued our community, frankly, since the sins of slavery, that are now just playing out in today's construct where you can't hide, there's video. So how do we do this in a manner that is beneficial for both the player, management, as well as the fans?
Is there a delicate balance you need to strike? Because we've seen the league really evolve in the last 5 years in terms of getting more involved, social justice issues, and really sending a message to its players that what's important to you is important to us. But is it a delicate balance when you're also want to keep this robust fan base who might look at sports as a refuge and say, we live in a politically charged world. I don't necessarily, even though I am very sympathetic to all the causes, I just want to watch sports. Is that a difficult balance to strike where you say, look, we want to promote these issues while still conducting a money-making operation?
It's not a delicate balance when when you're looking at the men and women perform as entertainers, and you're looking at those individuals, the fans, strictly as entertainers. not understanding and have no empathy for their struggles, their pain, or even see them outside of the uniforms that they wear inside the stadiums, on the court, on the baseball diamond, the soccer field. There's no regard for his or her life outside of him throwing a football, tackling, dribbling, shooting. What's the delicate balance is us calling out wrong is wrong, and doing the right thing for the right reasons. They're difficult conversations. And guess what? When we look at the fan base today, it's not going to be the same in the future. There's a respect and honor of the fans today. Obviously, the game doesn't happen without fans tuning in, but we cannot continue to witness what we've seen over the last 100 plus years. We're just not at that place anymore.
Yeah, I would just add here, I think it is a balance. And I think one thing it's important to say is it's a balance that has been made for far over a century. You know, one of the things Rise is always seeking to do, we have a Champions of Change activation, and we're always seeking to share with people, athletes today are actually taking a part in the legacy that athletes of the past have left them. Right, so this is not new to American culture. This is probably as much a part of American culture as anything else. You know, when Medgar Evers was assassinated, Bill Russell was the one that went down to Mississippi and hosted the first integrated basketball camp. This is not new, right? Like, athletes being invested in their whole selves and taking that to the community and to society at large, it is a part of what it means to be American. So it almost is that folks want to rewrite a narrative about what it means to be entertained or to be patriotic, when this is a part of what it means to be American, and it has been for a while.
Kobe,
That's a great point. If I can, Sam, just add one other point to that. This isn't new. You go back to Jesse Owens, to Muhammad Ali, to Bill Russell, to Billie Jean King, to Arthur Ashe, the entertainers during that time, Sam Cooke, Marvin Gaye. This has always been part of the athlete entertainment platform. So people say, I don't want that. No, it has always been part of the athlete struggle, men, women, throughout our history. So it's not new. The one thing that is different, that the athletes today are galvanized and they're organized and they're relentless.
Kobe and I, we had a discussion about the expectations of fans now, and sports fans, and Morgan can speak to this as well. They want to know more and more about you and their social media medium that you can find out what the person had for breakfast. Well, you know, how does that relate to accepting the whole message of an athlete, as opposed to just what you see on the screen?
Well, I think you said it. We've become a much more voyeuristic society. And when it comes down to it, if you want to get the totality of the player, as has been said before, the player isn't just someone that's on the field that's shooting a basket, kicking a ball, you know, or a variety of different things. It's the totality of their makeup. It's their life that we are seeing, that we are actually out there looking for now. We have all these different platforms where we can learn about an athlete. We talk about a LeBron James. Yes, it's fantastic to see him, you know, playing a game, but just as many people, if not more, want to go out and say, okay, what's he doing now? You know, so we want to find out what these different athletes are doing. Well, it's not just about, well, I'm going to pick and choose. You have to be willing to accept everything that athlete is, because the makeup of an athlete, what makes them so special on the field or on the court, you know, is that totality of what made them this human being, the past, you know, their experiences, the good and the bad, and the things that they are standing up for. So I think it's extremely important that people understand that, yeah, you're not going to like everything, but no one expects you to like everything. But to be respectful, you know, towards the other's beliefs is the important part.
Another issue.
To piggyback off of that too, it's, you know, everyone wants the access to the players. We want access to everything, but you can't have access through your own filter. And you have to be able to accept who someone is for all of them, you know, and I think that's something that we see as, you know, as a former athlete, I've just retired in March, and, to see the difference of being on the business side, and now I'm around the fans more, and it's kind of mind-blowing to see just all the different questions and how I'm being treated differently because of now I'm using my voice, now I'm speaking up. But when I was playing, they were my biggest fan. So I think having that access, but full access, and not trying to filter what a fan would want to see is important.
And what's interesting to Morgan's point is that we as corporations, we're selling access to Morgan. So we've put a price to us getting into what Morgan loves, where she spends her time, what she eats, how she trains. To Cody's point, if you want to enter into my world, enter to the totality of who I am and what I represent.
You know, you touched on something there about the struggles of an athlete and the different challenges of an athlete. Mental health is suddenly a prominent point of discussion in sports. What can be done to protect struggling athletes, given the reality that a player, say Naomi Osaka, has to have some meaningful interplay with the media? What should leagues do to further protect athletes from the extraordinary pressure and scrutiny that comes with a given sport?
Well, I'd really like to speak to this, seeing as how I have a PhD in sports psychology. I think that'd probably be a good place to start. And the first thing is to realize that, like, when we say sports psychology, it's the psychology of excellence through the very specific lens of the life of an athlete and the experiences of an athlete. The psychology is still there, but it's almost as if the pressures and the challenges are of you walking through an old school wall of, like, at the fun house, right? Mm-hmm. And some of the things that athletes do that are brilliant and other people see as larger than life, to us, it's like breathing. You know, you playing for the national team, that's easy because you've been conditioned to it. But the things that become hard for us are things that challenge identity, are things like injury, are balanced or are being filtered through that spectrum of the expectation of the athlete. And we get separated from general population when they don't view the world through the same magnitudes that we do. So we have to surround and fortify those athletes with people who understand the language that they're speaking and can help them become fluid in those situations, and to realize that their needs don't hit the weights the same as other people. So we have to know that and then fortify them with people who understand, speak the same language, and then can help prepare them for something that may or may not be in their strong suit. Because there is a halo effect of greatness, right? We look at someone and see them as great in one capacity, and we assume because they are larger than life in one area that they're then as equipped and fortified in all these other areas. So we have to realize that that's not the case, but the ability to be great in those is there. But we have to give them those resources the same way that we worry about their performance on the field.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. I wonder how Troy, Morgan, Kobe, how do you respond to that?
I mean, I 100% agree. And I think a big thing, especially in the Black community, is breaking that stigma around mental health. I think even when you're an athlete and, you know, you are kind of put on that pedestal of that expectation level, but if saying, like, you know, if you are struggling with something, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to reach out. And I know from myself struggling with injuries and then retirement unexpectedly, it's, you know, it's rough, but when you realize you do have a support system in your team or your union or different things can be that support system, and, you know, you're able to do that and use that resource, it's really helpful.
I'm excited about where it has gone. I came in, beepers was the most modern technology, having a beeper on your waist. The stigma around me, even at home, so it started at home. I couldn't have a conversation about, what are you talking about? You're not feeling well. Like, you would get in trouble to talk about, I'm not feeling well. I think something may be going on. Now to see the support around the athletes, around behavior health, mental health, to be able to speak about it openly is no longer a stigma. We're still fighting a little bit, but just watching what the sports leagues are doing, NBA, WNBA, our NFL platform, it's exciting. And to have children that are student athletes, to see the support around, you have coaches now, full-time coaches to support this area of the student athlete and the professional athlete. So I'm excited. There's been a lot of progression here, but we're really breaking down those stigmas around mental health.
Sam,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I ask you, what do you think is the responsibility of the sports journalist when you know that somebody's having some issues? We know that Cincinnati Enquirer reporter was apparently kind of antagonistic, or that was how it was taken. But do you think that the journalist has a responsibility to the athlete at all?
I think you have a responsibility as a professional and as a human being to not prey on someone who's clearly struggling. And so in that respect, yes, there is a responsibility to be able to look yourself in the mirror and treat people with dignity, as opposed to taking advantage of the situation. Yeah, there's definitely a responsibility. Colby, it looked like you had some thoughts on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think from the layman or the fan's perspective, I think they have to understand when we talk about mental health, it's not always something that is just an extended time period. It can be episodes that could happen. That can be, a lot of people don't like this word anymore, triggered by certain things like an injury, as you discussed, or a sudden retirement, or even just regular retirement. A lot of athletes have been in this path, and it's looking straight ahead. Okay, this is it. This is my life. This is what I'm doing, especially when you get into those later stages, those teen years, and you're like, okay, yeah, he's going to be the star. He's going to be the next one. He's doing this. Everything's taken care of. They're in this bubble. Everything's taken care of. They can go until their 20s, 30s, 40s. Either it's an injury or it's retirement or something comes up. I think people out there have to realize they haven't had the experiences that you have all had from the teens to the whenever that ends. And that could be in their 30s, could be their 40s, where it could be even more of an issue, because then it's okay, what's next? Or it could be going to college and you have expectations and then all of a sudden it stops. What are you doing next? If you're not prepared, then it's having that whole transition, as you discussed. It's like, how do you go from, okay, I was going to be this player in this sport, and now I've got to move into something completely different. And I think people have to put that in their minds. If whatever they're doing now, if all of a sudden they had to do something extremely different tomorrow, because one thing that I learned, even when you're done playing the game, you're done playing the game. Now that's starting to change, where we're starting to see, that those support systems come in, but, back in my day, it was like, you're done. Okay, on to the next, so you had to figure out what you could do, in the future. And I do love to see that slowly we're starting to find ways to get those support systems, to really support the athlete when they're done.
Well, and one of the things that you touched on is actually really why we're all here today, because the likelihood that an athlete will experience that immediate trauma is generally a direct result of what we call identity foreclosure. Right? I don't say I play football. I say I am a football player. And if my definition of I am is solely my function on the field, when I lose that function on the field, I lose my sense of self. Mm-hmm. So as we look at athletes as not just a player, but as a holistic person who is an advocate, who is an entrepreneur, who is a champion for society, who is exploring other dimensions of self, then when one of those dimensions maybe goes away, whether it's a temporary time as an injury or it transitions into another phase of self, we're much more likely to be able to say, okay, that was tough, but I still have 3 legs to my chair, as opposed to if it's just one and all of the sudden it's cut out beneath you and people fall really, really hard. So we want to encourage the full development of the person and the acknowledgement of the person, not just the player.
Morgan, as a high-level athlete, and I'd ask this of all the high-level athletes on this panel, you're in a very different situation in that you're evaluated and you have a readout on a weekly basis or sometimes on a daily basis of how you've done. You have a final score, and life isn't typically like that for people outside the game. How was it making that transition to, you have no more ratings on how you're doing? You just sort of have to figure it out.
You definitely do, and that's what I'm in the process of doing. I'm 3 months into my new job, and it's totally different than what I'm used to. I'm used to, at the same time, it's good because I'm used to, like, if I'm doing something wrong, I get yelled at, and it's this harsh criticism to do better. And now it's like, oh, you're doing okay. It's nice. It's even. So I think that helps, but the transition's hard. When you're, especially for me, like the team Connecticut Sun I work for, half the team I played with 2 years ago. And so to see them still on the court, and then, I'm sitting in the office and I enjoy it because this is my new phase and my new chapter, but making that transition, it was rough. It was hard to kind of accept, like, okay, that was one chapter of my life, kind of, I like the analogy of like the chair. And that was like, okay, that was just one leg cut off, but I have other legs that are left on the chair. And so figuring that out and trying to kind of find my path and way, it was tough. But one thing I definitely did was reach out to other players that went through similar situations and that are in similar jobs that I have now. And that was super helpful. And just kind of, like I said before, finding the resources and using them and trying to make sure that, you just take it one day at a time. I think it's helped the transition quite a bit.
I would say this to all new, let's say, transitioning players, not new retirees. Transition is a lifetime. You will be transitioning for the rest of your life. That's not a bad thing. But I'm happy that you used the language. That was one chapter of my life. And I would recommend that to all transitioning. The expiration date comes to all of us. Our body has an expiration date. It's really, have we prepared ourselves for that? Or are we going to accept this new normal is the term that I use. And I would just say, you are your own champion. You choose. If you can stay away from looking at our phones and seeing and being recognized by thumbs up, thumbs down, the smiley face, the sad face, and know that you are a queen, you are a champion, you are a king, you are a champion, and you define what success looks like. It allows you to transition into this new normal, because it is a new normal, in a honorable, mannerable, on your terms. So that's what I would just say to all those former athletes that are on the panel now, and those that are in that phase of transitioning, that it is a lifetime transition.
Well, and it goes to embracing multiple things that you can be good and great at, and not just after your sport, but throughout your life. Be curious, be hungry, and explore those things, so that you're always infusing yourself with different things that you're interested in. And you're not going to love all of them, but they will love you back at times when you need them to the most, if you've invested the time along the way.
Well,
Yeah, I would add here, I think I love this conversation. At the very core of RISE, one of the things we seek to start with most of our partners is identity. Even as we are addressing race, we start with identity. And the truth is, we start our education work there because if folks are introspective, race, what we do, they are all just one parts of our identity. They're just one way that we identify ourselves. And so, we do this work with high schoolers, collegiate athletes, professional athletes, sports business community as well, because we think that when you start at this point of identity, it allows you to address any number of things.
I want to talk about identity and sports business here. And I'm sitting in Pasadena in the iconic Rose Bowl, so many great moments here. It's a college football mecca. What's going to come of the name, image, likeness issue? And what are the potential risks and pitfalls of that? If you were a college coach right now, what would you be looking for? Troy, is this going to change the landscape of college sports?
I think it does. And I'm speaking personally, not for the organization that I work for. I'm speaking as a former athlete and a parent of a student athlete. It's pay to play. And that's when you look at the two sports that drive college athletics, that's basketball and football. When you start talking about paying young men and women coming out of high school, you're not thinking about academics. I mean, that's especially for those that are in need or that are looking for a way out. And then you dangle this short-lived, here are a few dollars, and we forget the core of why we can exist and have success is through education. Academics is important. So we still have to strike that right balance of academics and athletics. But we, as the adults, and I think we have to call it what it is, we have created that model of greed. And we look at television deals and the income that's coming in. When you sit in the stadium at 7 on a Saturday afternoon, you watch, there's 110,000 fans in that stadium. That game concludes and your son is calling you saying, Dad, can you take X, Y, and Z to Walmart? He needs to pick up some essentials. That's disheartening. That is disheartening as a parent when those young men, they created an atmosphere that drove 110,000 people, the apparel that was sold, and you mean to tell me they don't have what they need to live day to day? That's a problem. That's greed. So there's a fine line and balance, and we're trying to figure it out. I think the NC2A and all of the conferences, they have to figure that out. But we still have to make sure that academics is at the core of why you're on the college campus.
Kobe, do you think you were born 20 years too early?
Probably. Well, who knows? I don't know if I would have been as fortunate, but when we look at this, I think it's interesting. I mean, I couldn't agree more with Troy and what he said there, because look, both my dad had a PhD in chemistry, was a teacher later on. My mom was an English teacher. So for me, it's always been about the academics. And this is from a personal perspective. I do worry about where this leads, 5 to 10 years from now, what that does. But I have to, but in my heart, I'm that athlete, and I can completely understand. I lived through it, being a walk-on at UCLA. I understood the part where you didn't have, the essentials all the time, and you were struggling, to try to scrape up enough funds, for food, and all that stuff, where you're eating top ramen nonstop. So I can feel where these issues need to be, they should have been addressed quite some time ago. Let's be honest, where that balance could have been struck, where the athletes could have gotten something out of it. And now we're at this point where I think it's like the pendulum is swinging all the way to one side, and now we've got to try to get it just right in the middle, which is going to be a difficult process. I don't think there's any one right answer for this whole issue right now, because I think when you talk about athletes and bringing in so much money to a universities and to universities, and for them to still have players struggling to find their way on campus, something needs to be done.
Jen, I was there in 2015, came out summer of 2015 for training camp when you were with the Arizona Cardinals. That was a groundbreaking moment. Now we look across the league, and Bruce Arians, who you worked with in 2015, has hired 2 full-time female assistant coaches. What does the league need to do to continue this progress where upwards of 70% of the league office women constitute up to 70%? I believe 30% of the VPs and up are women in the NFL. But what about continuing the opportunities for women in professional football?
Well, one of the beautiful things about sport is that it has traditionally led culture and led societal change. And we see it as a place that champions the human spirit. And in football, we talk about it being a meritocracy, and it's the place and the space where when you're on the field, hey, if you've got the talent, I want you on my team. And that has to be an increased thing. It has to be about building bridges where we get to be on the same field and we get to experience like, hey, you know ball, I know ball. And it's not just about gender, it's about talent and it's about love of the game and it's about bringing the best forward. And for the progress that's been made to continue to be made, we have to show and demonstrate diversity at the highest level, which then gives the young kids permission to see it and say, I want to do that. I want to be there one day. I want to do what she's doing. And that means I'm going to work just as hard as other people. I'm going to play the game and I'm going to love it the same way so that my trajectory can be similar. You know, football is still the sport that doesn't have parity at any level, from the littlest kids to the highest level of professional. So it's very hard. It's also been called the final frontier for women in sports. Now, for those of us who played and, you know, have led the way through, whether it's playing or then going on to coaching, we took that as a challenge that when we changed football, we could shift culture through playing football. So we have to see it at the top levels. Those women have to be seen and celebrated through the history, the overcoming, and the young ones need the opportunities to have the same ball put in their hands and the same love put in their heart, and not to be told you can't do that because you're a girl. It's no longer acceptable to say that girls in this sport are the exceptions to the rule. We need to let them know that it's their time and they have the opportunity to rule the game just like the boys do.
Morgan, what's your perspective on that?
I 100% agree. You know, obviously basketball is different because we have women's basketball. There isn't a women's football, but, you know, I think representation is what matters. For, you know, to be able to see what you want to be is super important. And so, you know, I couldn't agree more.
How do you effectuate that in your life in terms of talking to to girls, to talking about career paths and trajectories? Because obviously not everyone can be a professional basketball player.
Yeah, when I do talk to girls, I just try to tell them whatever your passion is, that's what you should try to do. That's what I did when I was young. That's what I was told. And then if you get to a point where you can't do that passion, you pivot and you go to the next thing and you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you keep working towards something. And then, you know, I was also raised that, you know, women can do anything. Like, it doesn't put you in a box. It doesn't make it where, you know, oh, well, if I was a guy, I'd be able to do this. You know, that's not an excuse that I think I try to use, but that I know that women can do anything and we can be whoever we want to be. And that's just what I try to tell girls when I get a chance to.
Yeah, Sam, I would add there, I think it's really important. I mean, sometimes Rise comes under fire because we engage a lot of white people and a lot of white men. I think it is really important for us to have representation. I think it is equally or more important for us to have inclusion. And I think for inclusion, it requires that we deal with the folks that have privilege and we have these conversations about what's in their mind and what's in their hearts and what biases that they may have. You know, I think Morgan is amazing. I think what Jen did is wonderful. And I think they managed to achieve in the face of systemic oppression. And so one of the things we have to do, though, even as we're building up folks that are being marginalized, we have to work with the people who are holding the power and holding the privilege and push them to desire and to move to create more inclusive organizations and systems. And I'm actually happy to say I do think we see that happening in multiple leagues, in multiple ways. But we also see ways where, very clear ways across multiple sports where we have to improve upon that. I think there was just a really, I thought, a well-done report about the NCAA and places where, you know, as an organization, they could evolve as far as equity and how they're treating women's sports versus men's sports. And so I do think we've got to focus on the responsibility of those who have achieved. But we also have to focus on What is the responsibility for those that are holding power in the system, and how do they need to evolve?
I would agree with Diane. When I hear this conversation, I'm always amazed because we don't talk about the truth around it. We as men, oftentimes, it's our unwillingness to even present an opportunity. I mean, we're still today with Doc talked about, we got to celebrate. We got pioneers. It's the first. We're almost in 2022. Gen X and they've been seeing women in leadership positions. Our children today, principals, doctors, the vice president of the United States. I mean, we can go on and on. Why are we having this discussion? This should be a normal, everyday discussion, but it starts with, as Diane referenced, those that are in these leadership positions, we have to be willing to present opportunities. So, I mean, we just have to call it like it is. We should not be having this discussion going into 2022. We got to wake up. We're still living in the dinosaur. I mean, women are just as
Everything.
They're everything. Smart, genius. I mean, I work with men that know nothing about football, and you have to teach them.
And they're called
the same
reporters.
thing can apply.
Kobe,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
No, I would agree. And we talk about women, we talk about minorities. It's representation. Everyone up here has said it. And the key phrase is representation matters. You know, kids need to be able to look up to what they want to be, as Jen said. That's what it comes down to. And I'm sure all of us here in this panel, or at least I have myself, have heard people say that representation doesn't matter. I'm sorry, it does, because that's when you're as a child, you look up and say, that's the possibilities for me. If you see it, you think I can become it. You know, so I think it's really important that as we are dealing with the various people that are in charge, that we, you know, if it is a slight nudge that's needed, you know, we have to be willing to step forward and give that nudge to say, hey, help out here, you know, find those positions, give those opportunities, and let people step up. Because look, as Troy said, it's 2022, but we are still talking about it, because it's very easy for people to say it, but it's also very easy for people to not do it and to kind of let things drag out, to let things go on, and nothing changes. So we have to continue to push. We have to continue to have forums like this where we can speak out and put it, and I'm sorry to say it, put it in people's faces to say, hey, it's still not at the level where it needs to be. You know, so if we can continue to do that and have people doing this, hopefully we can work together with the different groups, get people into the right positions where the next generation looks, you know, at all of us, at the people that are coming through, and can say, okay, I'm willing to be that. And we'll see those numbers, you know, start to balance out a little bit more.
I think it's important too that we talk about the fortification that goes around the individuals that are up front too, and to realize when you are a first, you are divisive by nature, because not everybody wanted you there, and it is controversy, and people that aren't for change may not be for what is there. And are there the same systems? Is there the same mentorship? Is there the same guidance of like, hey, talk to so-and-so, or do this, or, you know, let's make sure that you're getting helped or supported in a way that you can continue to lead from the front and to do that. Because the importance of the first is that it allows you to get a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth. That's really what it's about. But it's not an easy road. And I can say it from having been there several times, both as a player in men's pro football and then as a coach. Like, every time you look around and you think, wow, there's a lot of work to do. Because the second you say first, it also means only. And that's a very tough place to be.
I would also put in what you said. One big statement: mentorship. That's key, and that can be addressed on both sides. The individual going out to try to find that mentor, but also for those that do want to help, that are in those positions of power, can you look and find someone to mentor, to allow them to come forward and bring them up into those positions and let them grow?
I'd like to just add that yes, we have a long way to go, and there's a lot of pioneering. And sports is an example for everybody. But let's give sports a little credit too, because when you look at like the high tech industry, it's a lot worse than sports and some other industries. So yes, I totally agree with every statement about we're not going fast enough and we're not doing enough and giving enough opportunities. But at least sports is, by and large, at least what I see is getting it for starters, compared to some other industries in our society right now.
Well, and it's a visual place and space that can set
It's
the
all the more
standards,
important that,
right?
that
And people
sports do.
champion it. They watch, they cheer for it. You may not know what's going on in a business room or a boardroom, but you can see it play out on a field like this. And you can see what's there, and you can also see what isn't.
Well, of course, it's the management that right now is that's where the action needs to be happening, ownership and management. And that's where we're hoping for more inclusion.
16 NFL stadiums were used as polling stations, and more recently, 21 NFL stadiums were used as COVID vaccination sites, with nearly 5 million shots administered. Still, the nation is grappling with vaccine hesitancy, a hesitancy that cuts across all races and socioeconomic categories. What should be the role of leagues and individual athletes in convincing people to get vaccinated?
I'll start with that question, Sam. I just think educating. I mean, it's a personal choice. It's a family choice. I think the role that we play in sports is we have an opportunity to educate the broader society by our megaphones and our platforms, whether it's the front office, the athletes, with our television partners. We have an opportunity to educate the larger consumer about where to go find information, not make a choice for them, but to try to give factual information or point people in a direction that may answer some of the questions that they may have.
I would add, Sam, I love the way you framed when Charlie asked you a question about what was the responsibility of the journalists. I think, this question makes me think of that. I think that the responsibility of the leagues and rises. We have pushed a number of leagues in this space, and I'm happy to say that I think they have responded well. But it's the responsibility of being a responsible corporate citizen, right? They have the responsibility of saying, here's how we define the common good. And as a corporation, they get to define it, however they're going to define it. But once they do that, then what does it mean for your role as a corporate citizen to help us achieve that common good? And so, in many ways, that's how we look at how many arenas. We worked really hard with a number of partnerships to get different arenas to open up as voting spaces. It's not a partisan issue. It is in our common good as a democracy for more people to take part. So therefore, what is your role as a corporate citizen if you believe that, like we believe that? And to Charlie's point, I do think we've got some things that we can look at and be excited about, because I think quite a few people stepped up, and I mean leagues, and I mean teams, and I mean owners, the folks that we don't necessarily see in this activist space. I think in that space they stood up, and they're doing it in the vaccination space as well, right? It's how do you define the common good, and then what's your role as a good corporate citizen?
Sam, that was one of my proudest moments last year, seeing 16 stadiums become really, truly integrated in their community, not just serving people of Black, white, Latino, they serve the entire population. That's the greater good of what sports brings in our venues. We bring to the community. We talk about, in most of the stadiums, many of our stadiums are in, I don't want to say underserved, but under-resourced communities. But we saw the power that it had in allowing people access for their civic duty. And so it was a proud moment to see, working with partners like Rise and Rock the Vote and the Players Coalition. It was doing the right thing for the right reasons. And I think everyone walked away saying, we're just better today when we can engage that way.
Absolutely.
Diane, I'd ask you, what more can teams, leagues, athletes, or ordinary fans or citizens do to advance social justice and civic engagement in their community?
Listen, I think that's a big question, but I think the short answer is we can all educate ourselves more, and then we can all empower ourselves more. We do a lot in Rise Space on the education front. And it is obvious that in this country, we need to educate ourselves more on these issues, and we need to be willing to talk about them. And we need to be willing to do the hard work of talking about them and looking introspectively and answering difficult questions. And then it's after that, empower yourself, figure out what is it that you care about and what are you going to get at? And, I think if I were going to simplify the answer, that would be it.
Charlie?
So Americans are great at liberties and not so great on responsibilities. We have to take responsibility as individual citizens, as individual players, as individual, wherever we are, our roles, and take that respect for the institution, for the other, and move forward with it. So it's personal responsibility. Ambassador Walter Annenberg said, citizenship is everyone's highest calling. So in the end, we're all on the same team. We all have to assume responsibility for our own citizenship. So I totally agree with Diane.
That's a good note to end on. I want to thank RISE, the Rose Bowl Institute, and ESPN for helping organize today's conversation. To all of our panelists for your leadership and inspiring words. For more information on RISE, follow them on social media at Rise to Win, or head to risethewin.org. And to learn more about the Rose Bowl Institute and their efforts around sportsmanship as citizenship, follow them on social media at Rose Bowl Institute, or visit rosebowlinstitute.org/citizenship. Once again, I'm Sam Farmer of the LA Times, and thanks for joining us.